What if you could only have one lens on your camera? It would be stuck on there forever and you'd have to do all of your photo and video work with only this one lens. It would have to be an amazing focal length that will cover most of everyone's creative needs, enabling you to shoot everything from landscapes to portraits and do video with a single lens. Well, what if I told you I actually have this lens right here? And it's honestly my most used lens of all time, but it's probably also Sony's most underrated lens. It's the 24-105 f4G lens, and in this video I'm going to tell you why this is the one lens that every creator absolutely needs to own. This was the first lens I bought after switching to Sony about 3 years ago. And for the longest time, this was the only lens that I had for my Sony a7 Mark III. I was shooting all of my photography and making all of my videos with only this one lens, so it's safe to say that I've had quite a lot of experiences with it. And the main reason I was able to only use this one lens for such a long time is because of its incredible versatility. No matter what kind of photography or video work you're doing, having a lot of variety packed in one lens means that you're not at risk of missing a shot. And when it comes to compositional options or the look of a shot, there are also fewer limitations to your creativity. Having that 24-105 range offers a lot of different opportunities for changing up your shot. One of the worst things is missing a shot or not taking a shot because you're fumbling around with different lenses and trying to decide, well, maybe I should take this lens or maybe I should take that lens. And having something that is capable of shooting pretty much everything takes away that stress. And if that hasn't convinced you yet, let's take a closer look at the 24-105 f4G lens. This lens is a member of Sony's G lineup, or their semi-pro grade lenses. So it's not a pro G Master lens, but at around €1,000, it's at least not as painfully expensive as its G Master equivalent, which I'll talk more about later on. It has a constant f4 aperture, and this is great because you're not having to give up any stops of light as you're zooming in, which is often the case with these types of lenses. Also typical for such lenses is that it extends when zooming out to the long end of the range. So when collapsed, it's 113 millimeters, and when extended, it's 170 millimeters. So it's a pretty compact lens. So this lens has quality Sony construction, and it's dust and moisture sealed. So it has this rubber edge here. That means you can use it outdoors and in any kind of weather situation. And I've used it in rain, snow, and freezing cold, and I've never ever had a problem with it. The autofocus system is fast, accurate, and most importantly, it's silent, which makes this lens a great option for videographers as well. Manual focusing on the 24-105 works by wire, and that essentially means that the manual focusing is electronic and not mechanical. It usually results in faster and more quiet focusing, but it's a bit more fiddly to manually focus. And it may not be to everyone's taste, but I personally don't have an issue with it. On the side of the lens, there's also a focus hold button that you can program with a number of different functions from within the camera. Besides that, there's also a button to switch between autofocus and manual focus, which is great because this is sometimes lacking on other mirrorless lenses, and it saves you the trouble of having to go into the menu to change your focus mode. The 24-105 G lens has a great minimum focus distance. The average minimum focus distance for these types of lenses is usually around 45 centimeters, but this lens can be focused down to 38 centimeters. And I've used this lens for detailed product shots, and I've gotten some pretty nice results. There's also a switch to turn off or on optical steady shot. So yes, this lens features an image stabilizer, which is again great for video. Even if most Sony cameras offer in-body stabilization, that extra bit coming from the optical steady shot really makes the footage a bit more smooth. But it also helps for shooting handheld photos at longer focal lengths and at slower shutter speeds. And by now you might be thinking, well, what about the 24-70 f2.8? I thought that was the lens that everyone should have. And you're not wrong to be thinking about that lens. However, one important thing to consider, if not the most important thing, is that the mighty 24-70 f2.8 G Master is a lot more expensive and might be beyond the reach of most people's pockets. Besides that, the 24-105 has quite a bit more zoom range, which in a lot of situations makes a massive difference. For me, this was the most important reason for buying the 24-105 over the 24-70. And I absolutely love having this extra zoom range. Just have a look at what a difference that extra 35mm makes. The 24-105 is also about 200 grams lighter and a little bit smaller, so it will take up less real estate in your camera bag. Not that this really matters, because when you own this lens, it'll most likely live on your camera anyway. So really, the only advantage that the 24-70 has on the 24-105 is that one extra stop of light. However, when you consider the quality that cameras can deliver nowadays and how well they deal with higher ISO, I really don't think that this is such a huge deal for most situations. So then the only thing that really matters regarding the f2.8 aperture is that it offers a shallower depth of field. However, again, I don't think that it justifies paying double the amount and giving up that extra focal range. Besides that, in most situations, you don't really need that shallow depth of field because you want most of your subject to be in focus anyway. So honestly, I couldn't find an actual reason to consider the 24-70 over the 24-105, but I'd love to know what you guys think about this, so feel free to write it down in the comments. Okay, so far I've done nothing but praise this lens, and I do really think that this is a fantastic piece of glass, but there are pros and cons to everything. And the 24-105 is a mid-range all-round lens, which is a good thing, but also a bad thing. Let me explain. At 24mm full frame, this lens is pretty wide, but it's not super wide. So for certain types of photos, such as specific landscape shots or interior photography, it's not going to be wide enough. And at 105mm, it's also pretty long, but it's not super long. Again, if you're shooting very specific types of photography, let's say wildlife or certain types of sports photography, that 105mm is just not going to be enough. I already mentioned the shallower depth of field that you will get with the f2.8 aperture from the 24-70, and prime lenses with an even larger aperture, so a lower f-stop, will provide an even shallower depth of field. So again, for very specific types of photos, that f4 aperture from the 24-105 won't really compete. Also, for things like astrophotography, a larger aperture and the extra amount of light entering the camera because of that does really make a slight difference. So the main takeaway from this is, if you're looking for very specific results, you should be looking at a very specific lens. But I guess that kind of makes sense, right? One thing I'd like to mention as well is that this lens isn't mind-blowingly sharp, and that's simply because a 24-105 zoom range is about as large as you can go without losing quality optical results. So you can't really expect this lens to compete with the best prime lenses at their given focal lengths. But don't get me wrong here, the 24-105G lens actually delivers an above average performance for this type of lens. And compared to similar mid-range zoom lenses, it's actually one of the sharpest ones out there. So for most people, this is going to be more than enough, and it's only really lacking sharpness when compared to those pro prime lenses. Also, that slight lack of perfect sharpness is most noticeable in the corners of the image and at wider focal lengths. But honestly, these few shortcomings are easily forgotten about when looking at the entire package of the 24-105G lens. It's really hard to compete with the versatility offered by this lens. It will cover most of your creative needs and will be able to handle the majority of any shooting situations. Besides that, the image quality and the build quality you're getting without completely breaking the bank is pretty incredible. So unless you have very specific needs like wildlife or super wide shots or very artsy shallow depth of field photos, this lens will have you covered. If you're just starting out or you're new to the Sony system and you're unsure about what lens to get, or maybe you're looking for a good all-around on-the-go day-to-day lens, then I strongly suggest that you consider the 24-105 because it will tick all of the boxes for most creators out there. And honestly, it will last you a very, very long time. Like I said, I've owned this lens for over 3 years and it's still the one lens that I use most of the time. Of course, over time, you'll most likely invest in other lenses as well. Lenses for specific needs that you'll develop on your journey as a creative. And if you're wondering what those lenses might be, definitely go check out this video next. Thanks a lot for watching and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!